Hey guys, welcome. If you've been having automatic negative reactions to certain triggers in your daily life and you find yourself feeling guilty, ashamed, angry, upset at those automatic reactions to those triggers, and despite trying to use a lot of willpower or different coping mechanisms, if you're having difficulty getting those automatic and negative reactions to be different than what they are, then this is really going to fit for you. So if you're new to our community, welcome. My name is Ty Hicks, founder of mentalhealthcoaching.com. And my purpose in putting this content out there is because I used to have incredibly high anxiety and suicidal depression. Therapy and medications didn't really work for me, but I found a unique method that did. And so we put this content out there because my belief is nobody deserves to live with anxiety or depression. They are things that we can learn to live without if we have the right skill set, the right tools. Okay. So if you can hear me, if you can see me, go ahead and let me know. I would greatly appreciate it. And what we're going to be walking through, as I said, is a way to identify, interrupt, and replace our automatic negative reactions. And we do this through something that we call the Jukebox method. The inspiration behind today's session was because I basically have had in the recent past so many people, probably at least half a dozen just this week, most of them in the last couple of days, who have been very confused about what anxiety even really is. And I want to just dispel a couple common myths that are out there and help you better conceptualize what it really is. So first of all, there have been at least 4 major peer-reviewed medical meta-studies that have confirmed that anxiety is not biochemical. That was a myth that basically started in the 80s, and it just became commonplace and common practice to prescribe pharmaceuticals for anxiety. A very small portion of the population finds that medication creates lasting relief. It's about less than 25%. That's according to the most recent research coming out of University College London. I did a whole other session specifically breaking all that down. But rest assured, it is not biochemical. That's not the source of the issue. The other misconception that people have very often is that all that they can really do with anxiety is that they can just simply cope with it. And there's a variety of different coping mechanisms out there. So there's self-administered coping mechanisms like meditation, journaling, breath work, things like that. And then, of course, there's all sorts of professionally administered coping practices, CBT, DBT, EMDR, talk therapy, all sorts of things of that nature. And the reason why what we call the coping mindset has been around so predominantly is because people have believed for a very, very long time that anxiety is something you just have to live with indefinitely. Again, the most recent medical research shows that this is not the case, that there are now infinite number of documented cases of people being able to recover from anxiety, live without anxiety. But what they have found is kind of the missing ingredient is brain retraining. So if you look at the most recent medical research, again, I did a session, I think just literally 2 weeks ago on this. So go ahead and watch that one if you haven't yet. And I break it all down. I've got quotes, I've got citations and everything in there. But basically what science is now confirming and what medical research is now confirming is what I've been teaching for about 7.5 years, which is that coping just never really goes deep enough. And if you really want to live a life without anxiety, you must fundamentally retrain the brain to think differently. Okay, so the reason why that is the case is because if we use breath work, meditation, journaling, any of those types of things, all of those are in response to the brain's automatic negative thoughts. Okay, so some research coming out of Stanford University, this was in 2022, found that the average thought has at least 60,000 thoughts, but more importantly than that, about 90% of those thoughts that we have every day are the same thoughts day in and day out. And so an anti-anxiety medication is basically just trying to curb the effects of those automatic negative thoughts. So let's say you're feeling anxious 80-90% of the time. That's a pretty good indicator that, as a rough estimate, 80 to 90% of your thoughts on a daily basis are anxiety-inducing thoughts. They're happening involuntarily, habitually. It's not your fault that that's happening. It's working against you, right? Basically, your brain is programmed currently to think a certain way, to continue to fixate in a certain way. And this is why there's usually such a major disconnect between people who've got anxiety and then the support system that they have around them, because The people in your support system will be saying things like, just think positive, look on the bright side, da 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 da, or like those classic things. And what you're trying to articulate is that you'd really love to do that, but that your brain automatically, involuntarily pulls you. It automatically spits out those anxious thoughts. And so the coping processes simply curb that by basically giving you a way to respond to the anxious thoughts. So if I've got, let's say, out of my 60,000 plus thoughts a day, I've got 40,000 of them are anxiety inducing. Well, I can breathe, I can focus on my breath, I can, meditate, I can journal and slow the thoughts down. I can do all these sorts of things to kind of like, play traffic control with the thoughts basically. But unless I get my brain to stop popping out those automatic negative thoughts and then reactions on top of that, reactions is just a variation of thoughts, I'll explain in a second, then I'm screwed, right? But if I can just simply get my brain to stop going down anxiety alley and instead go down the, different avenue that creates joy and have an automatic positive reaction instead of an automatic negative reaction, then the anxiety goes away. And that's what I did. It took me about 2 years to figure it out on my own. But now that we've done it hundreds and hundreds of times with clients, it takes only usually 10 to 12 weeks. Okay, so it's a pretty simple process. So I'm going to be breaking down kind of a way to get your reconditioning process started and a way to kind of conceptualize it, because it might still sound kind of theoretical to you, like, okay, well, that sort of makes sense, but how can I kind of lock that in? So I don't want to bog you down with a bunch of like neuroscience and how exactly your brain works and all these kinds of things, but there's a metaphor that should help you really understand what it is that you need to do and how to actually fix the problem. So think of your mind basically like a jukebox. Okay, so let's say in a standard jukebox we've got, I don't know, like 100 CDs maybe. And let's say in your brain, theoretically, we've got also about 100 CDs. And as you might know, if you've ever encountered a jukebox, you go up to one of the classic ones, you put in a sequence of numbers and letters, and then the jukebox pulls forward an automatic, a CD basically that's linked with that particular pattern, and it plays the CD. So if I go up and press the same sequence of numbers 10 times, I'm going to get the same CD played 10 times, unless I replace the CD. So when the way that your brain works is actually not that different, in that your brain has a series of patterns. That's the key word that you want to remember, patterns. If you don't like that word, you can think of it as reactions, okay, automatic reactions. But your reactions are just a type of a pattern. And so if I go up to you and I say a particular thing that is triggering to you, then you're going to have probably a habitual reaction to that thing that I just said. Or for many of you, your triggers might be driving in your car, going to work, getting out in a public place, going to the grocery store. It could be giving a presentation at your company. It could be trying to interact with your child who's having a little bit of a tantrum. Okay, all of you have different triggers, right? But you know what yours specifically are. Let me know in the comments too what your triggers are or have been, because I can help, kind of provide some more specific coaching for you. But think about each one of those triggers. And what the thing is that people think the trigger is the problem. And so there's this natural tendency to want to insulate yourself from the triggers. The problem that you've probably encountered, though, if you've tried to remove yourself from triggers, is that your mind will typically find a new thing to react anxiously to. Have you ever experienced that? So like what happens for a lot of people is they'll leave work because they think, oh my gosh, I'm so triggered at work, I need to stop working for a while. And it feels good for maybe a couple of weeks, but then their mind will start a whole new series of automatic negative thoughts at home. They'll get triggered in different ways in a different situation. So unless we deal with the pattern, unless we deal with the CD, then we're not really dealing with the source of the problem. So because every time I go up to that jukebox and I type in that sequence, I'm going to get the same reaction. I'm going to get the same CD because that's what it's linked to do inside of the system. So I can, of course, stop pressing buttons, but that's not really realistic, right? Especially if you want to go out and live in the world, you need to be able to go to the grocery store or go to a concert or drive your car or whatever it is you need to do, go out on a date. And so what we've got to do is we've got to deal with the patterns. Okay. And so there's a process that we use with clients. And the basic summary of it is identify, interrupt, and replace. Okay, identify, interrupt, and replace, because you can't change something until you identify it, until you pinpoint it. And I'm talking about going much deeper than, oh yeah, I know I have a tough time in public places. No. What I'm talking about is identifying the very, very specific internal subconscious pattern that's being generated that's causing the anxiety. So for some people, it's a automatic negative visualization. For some, it's an automatic internal dialogue pattern. For some people, it's more of an automatic physical response. Okay, those are the three most common. But what we have to do is we have to identify what that specific pattern is. We have to identify what the exact opposite reaction is that we want. We need to identify the trigger that's causing the whole sequence to occur. And then we simply need to close the gap with the right customized conditioning strategies for your particular situation. And I'm going to walk you through exactly how to do that. So to finish the metaphor, and then I'll walk you through kind of the tactics of, how to start doing this. What we do with clients, metaphorically speaking, is we help them identify like every single one of their CDs. Most people will have 10 to 12 core patterns that are subconscious, that they're not aware of, that are creating 90% plus of their anxiety. So as soon as we identify those 10 to 12, and we identify what the automatic new reaction is that they want to have, the job's already half done. Then all we got to do is pair them up with the right conditioning process. So let me walk you through one of the ways that you can kind of get started with this, and you'll see how it's really powerful. Okay, so if you were gonna like take some notes, you don't necessarily have to, but this would be kind of a simple little exercise you could do to get you started. What you'd want to do is have a piece of paper and have it horizontally. And the very simple first thing that you can do is identify what all of your triggers are. All right, and so we would divide it into 3 columns, and the first column would be for your triggers, and we would give that the code name X. So you could just label that first column triggers, and then in parentheses maybe put an X, okay, and you'll see why in a second. And so pretty simply, just think through in a typical week, what are all of the different triggers that you have? They will usually be environments, or they will be people, or they will be types of communication that are said to you, things like that. The other common one would be a time of day, for example, things like that. But it could be watching the news, it could be going out in your vehicle, it could be your spouse looking at you a certain way, it could be your child asking you for something, okay? It could be all sorts of things. Just think through like one for right now, okay? And tell me what it is in the chat if you don't mind. Let me know in the comments, okay? Just think through like your biggest number one trigger that you want to get rid of. Okay, so you'd list all of those out in that column, and then we've got the second column, and the second column is column Y, and the column Y is for the current pattern, okay, the current pattern. And so here's the simple way that you would want to start thinking about the pattern. It is a little bit more, slightly more nuanced than this, like, and it has to be customized per person, but here are a couple pointers to get you started. Firstly, is there anything that your mind automatically pictures? Okay, so for approximately 60% of the population, you'll create a picture in your mind or a movie of some kind. So like a classic example would be you go out of your house and you open the car door, you're getting your car, and then all of a sudden your mind kind of plays a movie of like a car accident. Or let's say you are at work and you notice your heartbeat, and then all of a sudden your mind plays a movie of you having a heart attack, okay? So those would just be a couple examples. So that would be the one thing. Like, does your mind play a movie? It's okay if the answer is no, okay? But just, kind of see if that's the case. And then number 2, is there some specific thing that your mind says to itself? And for about 90% of the population, there is some type of language. For about 60% of the population, it's a movie and language. For most people, definitely some kind of language is taking place. But there's something that's being said, some type of automatic, immediate sentence or word or reaction, something that's being said regularly. And if you can identify what that is, then you're very, very close to starting to reduce your anxiety very quickly. I'll give you some of the common ones that might help you. A big one is some type of phrase, what if? So like, I just worked with a woman earlier today, and she was saying, like, what if I go crazy? What if I go crazy? Another common one is a going to statement, like I'm going to wreck my car, I'm going to have a heart attack, I'm going to freak out. Okay, something along those lines. Those are two of the big ones. There's like 40 potential ones that cause anxiety. Those are two of the big ones. But what exactly do you say to yourself? Okay, so we've got the trigger in the first column, and then we've got what you either visualize and or what you say to yourself in the middle column. Okay, and then the third column would be what is the new reaction that you want to have. Okay, and you can simply just flip the current pattern on its head as a sort of simple starting point. Again, this is I'm doing a session here that's for the general public, so I don't know you and your particular exact specific pattern. If I, could talk to you for just a few minutes, I'd be able to tell you here's the exact specific strategy to use, but these are just some general pointers that should help you. Okay, so for example, if your mind is imagining getting in that car accident visually, and it's doing it first person, then what you might want to replace that with is getting your brain to imagine yourself having a good, relaxing drive to the store, right, and enjoying it. If your mind has some internal dialogue, like, what if I get sick? Maybe what we want to do is we want to replace that dialogue with a very firm, confident sentence like, I'm healthy and wealthy and grateful, something like that, okay? Or just something simple, like, I'm totally fine. So you'd want to design your new pattern. Okay, so remember, we have to identify the current pattern and we have to replace it. So we identify it, we interrupt it, and we replace it. So we've got X and Y and Z, we've got all three columns. And ideally what you'd want to do is do this for every one of your triggers. And it's kind of like, opening up the hood of the jukebox and saying, okay, well, what are all of the different things that we keep punching into the jukebox that keep playing music? And then what are all of the songs that are linked to those sequences of letters and numbers? And then, all right, I don't like those songs so much. What do I want to replace that with? All right, so you just kind of systematically map it out like that. And you don't have to take a lot of time with it. I would recommend even if you just did it with your very first one, that would get you a good start. Like I said, most people have 10 to 12. Most of them are very subconscious. Most people are able to identify 2 or 3 of these themselves consciously. And then, it kind of tends to take a little bit more training to identify each and every one of the other ones. But you'll map that out on a piece of paper, the trigger, the old pattern, and then the new pattern, what it is that you want. And then here's one conditioning strategy that tends to work for most people to get them started. Again, like I said, there's different types of anxiety, there's different types of people. So if you want something super, super customized for you, happy to help you out on a free coaching session. Just let me know. I'm happy to set that up for you and I can help you out. But here's a simple little strategy you can get started using. Okay, so what you would want to write this down, please, is when X occurs, don't do Y, do Z instead. So when X occurs, don't do Y, do Z instead. So basically, if we come back to that jukebox metaphor, what we're saying here is, okay, when I type in this sequence of numbers, don't play this old song. Instead, play this song right here. Now, I'll tell you a little bit of the science as to why this strategy works so well. The reason why it works so well is because you cannot effectively get rid of one pattern without replacing it with something else. And this is why, like I shared with you before, a lot of people will notice that their anxiety morphs and shifts and changes over the months and years, but they don't get rid of it. So they were triggered at work and they were getting anxious at work, and then they, stopped going to work for a while. And they feel good for a minute, but then all of a sudden now they've got new automatic reactions to new triggers, right? And so that's because your brain has effectively replaced one form of anxiety with a different form of anxiety. So your brain is constantly doing this. It's constantly wiring and rewiring itself. It's just that for most of us, we're doing it by default. We're not actively, purposefully training our brain. Our brain is just getting trained by default. So we want to take control. We want to get our own user's manual for the brain, and we want to learn how to do this. And this little phrase I'm giving you is a really good starting point that works for most people. So you map out the triggers, you map out the old patterns, you map out the new reactions and patterns that you want to have, and then you use this phrase, okay, whenever X occurs, I'm not going to do Y anymore, I'm going to do Z instead. So I can walk you through some practical examples. Let's say you keep snapping at your partner. So your partner asks you, I don't know, like your partner raises their voice maybe, like they just have kind of a tone of voice. They're not being aggressive or anything. They just kind of like raise their voice and get animated where they're not even mad at you. Maybe they're mad at something else, and that triggers you. So what you could say is, okay, whenever my partner raises their voice, don't assume that they're mad at me. Instead, get curious about what's bothering them and try to help them out. Okay, that would be an example. Let me give you a couple other examples. Let's say it's a health anxiety related one. Okay, so whenever I notice a sensation in my body, that would be the trigger. Don't visualize myself getting sick. That would be the old pattern. Instead, remind myself that it's just a bodily sensation, not a symptom. Okay, that would be one. If you're dealing with panic attacks, a good one for panic attacks would be like, whenever I start to feel nervous, okay, don't restrict my breathing. Instead, breathe deeply and focus on the day going how I want it to go, as opposed to how I fear it going. Okay, so those are just a couple different examples, but it can be totally customized for you. I've used this strategy for all sorts of things: changing behaviors, changing thoughts, changing beliefs. Again, it's simple, it's basic, it's generic, it works for most people. It's a good way to get started. So hopefully that helps you. But the key thing I want you to understand is every single client I've ever had, we're now at like 612 graduated clients over 7.5 years. And at least a couple hundred of those people have reported full anxiety recoveries. The average result we get for a typical person is at least a 75% reduction in the anxiety. And what I want you to understand is that you can do this. You absolutely can do this. It's just a matter of identifying all of the patterns that are causing you a problem and then systematically rewiring the brain to have a new automatic reaction. Because your brain is rewiring itself all the time. It happens constantly. It's just now you need to learn how to do it deliberately and consciously. Okay, so I hope that helps you. If you would like a little bit of additional one-on-one help to do this, I have a little process that I can walk you through in like a little half-an-hour session. We offer a completely free anxiety elimination coaching session for any member of the Facebook group or any listener to our podcast or YouTube channel. If you haven't done one with me yet, if you're in our Facebook group and you're watching this live, just go ahead and put session in the comments. I'll be happy to reach out to you and schedule something. There's no catch, no pitch, nothing like that. My favorite way to convince people that my method can actually help them is just to help them, right? Because if I help you and you get results in a half an hour, you'll be like, wow, this is pretty cool. I think I'd actually like to hear more about that. So I just like to lead with adding value for people. And if you're joining on our podcast or YouTube afterwards, just go ahead and go to mentalhealthcoaching.com and you can book a session there. But I hope you guys found this helpful. I'll be looking forward to seeing you guys next week. Have a good week. Take care. Bye.